Sometimes the most valuable trade candidates in this entire league aren't the flashiest scorers. They're the players who quietly make everyone else on the floor better by taking away the other team's best option every single night. Tonight on the show, I have to tell you about exactly that kind of player, because Herb Jones's name has increasingly come up in real trade conversations around the league, and one team that makes a ton of sense as a suitor is the Golden State Warriors. So stay with me, Warriors fans, because adding this kind of elite, multi-positional defender to protect Stephen Curry on the other end of the floor is exactly the kind of move that extends a championship window. Here's exactly what's being reported, cutting right through the noise. According to national analysts, Herb Jones has been specifically flagged as a real, genuine trade candidate this offseason, right alongside teammate Trey Murphy on the list of Pelicans players drawing serious outside interest as New Orleans continues its broader roster reset under new head of basketball operations Joe DeMars. The genuine durability question, over 100 missed games combined across the last 2 seasons, has tempered the price somewhat, with the going rate reportedly sitting closer to 1 or 2 first-round picks rather than a full complete haul. Herb Jones, lined up in a Warriors uniform. Read that line again, slowly, because if you truly understand just how rare a true multi-positional defender like this really is, and you understand exactly what this Warriors roster has needed defensively for years now, you understand precisely why this could be one of the most impactful, if genuinely under-the-radar moves of the entire offseason. And I am here to walk you through step by step exactly why a player this good might genuinely be available, because it's a fascinating situation developing in real time. Now, I already know exactly what some of you are going to bring up right away, the durability history and whether it's genuinely worth the real draft capital, and we're going to get to every single bit of it, I promise, because I always give you the honest version. But stay with me through this one, because pairing a genuinely elite defensive stopper with Stephen Curry's offensive genius is exactly the kind of move that changes an entire championship equation. Let me start with why Herb Jones is even in this conversation, because it's a fascinating situation. The New Orleans Pelicans are right in the middle of a genuine roster reset under new head of basketball operations Joe DeMars, who has already fired the head coach, hired a brand new one, and made it clear he intends to put his own stamp on this entire roster. As part of that entire broader reset, multiple national analysts have specifically flagged Herb Jones as a real trade candidate this offseason, name-checked right alongside teammate Trey Murphy on the entire list of Pelicans players drawing outside interest. The honest complicating factor here is durability, since Jones has genuinely missed over 100 games combined across the last 2 seasons, and that injury history has tempered what would otherwise be an even hotter market for a defender of his exact caliber. Even with that durability question fully attached, reporting suggests the real market for him would likely land around 1 to 2 first-round picks, a real, genuinely meaningful price for a rebuilding team looking to accumulate future assets. That right there is the crack in the door, and it is genuinely open, and let me underline just how real this new era of player movement is, because it's the whole foundation here. Just think about what we have already witnessed in this exact offseason alone. A 2-time MVP was traded in one of the single biggest blockbusters in recent NBA history. A star wing was dealt in a completely separate, franchise-altering trade of his own making. Across the entire league, the players everyone assumed were foundational, completely untouchable pieces have changed teams one after another. The old certainties about who can and cannot be moved are simply completely dead. And in Herb Jones's specific case, you have a rebuilding franchise actively taking real calls on multiple veteran pieces, a front office with every genuine incentive to stockpile future draft capital, and a genuinely elite defender whose value, durability questions entirely aside, remains extremely high around the entire league. The door is genuinely open, the reset is real and ongoing, and the only real question is which contender is bold enough to actually make the call. So now let me tell you exactly who Herb Jones is, in case anyone needs the reminder, because this is the part that should get you right up and out of your seat. Herb Jones is one of the single most valuable, versatile defenders anywhere in the entire NBA. He's a player who can guard literally anyone on the floor, point guards, wings, even bigger forwards in a pinch, the kind of defensive Swiss Army knife that every single contender in this league covets. He has genuinely legitimate all-defensive caliber tools, elite length, quick active hands, and exactly the kind of high-level basketball IQ that lets him anticipate plays before they even fully develop. He's also developed real, genuinely functional offensive skills over the course of his career. A willing cutter, a connective, unselfish passer, and a three-point shooter who has shown real flashes of consistency when given the opportunity. He's still just 27 years old, squarely in his athletic prime, exactly the age where a true two-way wing becomes an invaluable, genuinely foundational piece for a real, legitimate contender. Acquiring a player like this isn't just adding a piece, it's adding one of the premier individual defenders in the entire league, still in his prime. And let me put his resume in proper context because it tells you why this matters. A player who can genuinely guard the other team's best perimeter scorer on a nightly basis, regardless of size or position. A legitimate, genuine playoff difference maker whose defensive impact all by itself can swing an entire series. Defenders with this exact level of versatility and pure instinct are exceedingly rare around this league, the kind of connective glue player that turns a merely good roster into a genuine, real championship contender. That's precisely why his name keeps coming up in serious trade conversations all around the league, even as his own team continues to weigh exactly what he's actually worth on the open trade market. So now let's talk about why this fits the Warriors so perfectly, because it directly addresses a real, persistent weakness this roster has had for years. But first, let me make sure you really appreciate how rare a player like this actually is, because it's the whole point of the story. In today's NBA, the hardest thing in the world to find is a wing defender who can legitimately guard multiple positions at an elite level, the kind of player who takes away an opposing offense's best option no matter who that happens to be on a given night. Most teams around the league have one, maybe two players who can genuinely do that at all, and even fewer who can do it while still contributing something real on the other end of the floor as well. Herb Jones does exactly that, at just 27 years old, squarely in his athletic prime. Think about how few players in the entire league combine that level of defensive versatility with real two-way value. That's exactly why national analysts continue to flag him as one of the most coveted trade candidates of the entire offseason, durability concerns and all. Here's the exact situation in Golden State right now. We are in the absolute final act of one of the greatest dynasties in NBA history, and while Stephen Curry remains genuinely magnificent on the offensive end, this roster has lacked a true versatile stopper who can hide Curry's own defensive limitations by taking on the other team's most dangerous perimeter threat every single night. Herb Jones is precisely that kind of player, and it's genuinely not particularly close. Just imagine a Warriors defense where Curry no longer has to chase the other team's best scorer around screens all game, because Herb Jones is doing that job at an elite level, freeing Curry up to conserve energy for what he does best on offense. That's not just a marginal improvement to a good defense. That's exactly the kind of defensive foundation that has been genuinely missing from this roster for the entire back half of the Curry era, the connective glue piece that makes every single other lineup decision easier. So now let's talk about how this would actually work in practice, because the price is genuinely reasonable here. Reporting suggests the going rate for Herb Jones would be somewhere around 1 to 2 first-round picks, a real but genuinely manageable price to pay compared to what a healthier, more offensively productive star would typically cost on the open market. The Warriors would need to put together a real, legitimate package, but this is nowhere near the scale of a true blockbuster-level trade. For a front office looking to add real, meaningful value without completely depleting the entire cupboard, this is exactly the kind of shrewd value-add move worth genuinely pursuing. And let me put the on-court fit into even sharper terms, because in a playoff series, it's everything. Stephen Curry is going to score no matter what a defense throws at him, but the question that has haunted the Warriors for years is what happens on the other end when the other team's best perimeter scorer attacks Curry over and over in a 7-game series. Herb Jones answers that question directly, at an elite level, and takes that exact burden off Curry's shoulders. That's not a marginal upgrade to a good defense. That's the kind of specific targeted fix that turns a vulnerable defense into a genuinely tough one to play against in the spring. And let me put this in the context of what the Warriors are actually chasing, because it raises the stakes. This is a franchise that measures itself in championships, and Curry's prime window is closing by the day. A true multi-positional stopper becoming available at a reasonable price is exactly the kind of value opportunity a front office cannot afford to pass up while the window remains open, even slightly. But I told you I'd be honest. So let's take the doubts head on, because on this one, they are very real. The first and biggest objection is the durability history. Herb Jones has genuinely missed over 100 games combined across the last 2 seasons, and betting real significant draft capital on a player with that kind of injury track record is a genuine, honest risk. That's a fair, genuinely real concern to have, and I won't pretend otherwise for a second. The honest counter is that when he's actually healthy, his impact on winning basketball is genuinely undeniable, and on a deep roster like Golden State's, his workload could potentially be managed far more carefully than it ever was in New Orleans. The second objection is the offensive limitations, since Jones has only had 1 season as a truly league average shooter. Fair enough. But a team built entirely around Curry's shooting gravity doesn't need Herb Jones to score at a high volume. It needs him to defend at an elite level and make winning plays, and that's precisely his specialty. The third objection is whether New Orleans would even prioritize moving him given his defensive value to a rebuilding roster too. It's a fair question. But a genuine full rebuild always prioritizes real draft capital over incremental veteran wins, and Herb Jones's value on the open trade market is exactly the kind of asset a resetting front office genuinely wants to cash in on. Let me also address the durability question one more time, because it deserves real nuance rather than a simple dismissal. Herb Jones has genuinely missed real time over the last 2 seasons, and that's not something to wave away. But the exact injuries have not been the chronic degenerative kind that permanently sap a player's explosiveness. They've been the kind that a deeper roster with a more careful load management approach can genuinely mitigate. The Warriors, with real depth on the wing already in place, are exactly the kind of team that could manage his minutes intelligently rather than needing him to play 40 minutes a night on a rebuilding roster the way New Orleans often has. So let me tell you where my head is at, and then I've got one final thought that I think is the real key to all of this. If the Warriors actually pull this off, they add one of the single premier individual defenders anywhere in the entire league to a roster still led by the greatest shooter who ever lived, giving Stephen Curry real, genuine defensive cover for the first time in years. Just picture it for a second. Stephen Curry genuinely conserving energy on the defensive end, while Herb Jones locks down the other team's best perimeter scorer. A Warriors team that suddenly looks far, far tougher to score against in a real playoff series. Whether it's actually realistic comes down to the durability risk, and whether the Warriors genuinely have the picks available to spend, and that's the real honest debate here. But the ceiling of this move, genuinely real defensive infrastructure to properly complement Curry's offense, is honestly valuable. And for a franchise chasing one final championship, that's more than worth exploring. And here's the thought I want to leave you with, the part almost nobody is connecting. Elite, genuinely multi-positional wing defenders in their prime essentially never ever become available at a reasonable price, because every single team in the league understands exactly how valuable that specific skill set becomes in a playoff series. New Orleans' ongoing organizational reset has created exactly that kind of genuinely rare opening on the trade market. The Warriors, with a closing championship window and a real, persistent defensive need, are exactly the kind of team that should be making this call. So let me boil it all the way down for you, because I want this crystal clear. A dynasty in its absolute final act, still led by the greatest shooter the game has ever seen, in genuine need of real defensive infrastructure to complement his offense. An elite, still prime defender in Herb Jones, sitting on a rebuilding Pelicans roster that's actively taking calls as part of a broader reset. The honest obstacle is the durability history, and the price, while reasonable, is still real. But how many times have the Warriors wished a true defensive stopper would simply become available? This might genuinely be that chance.